It is recommended if you are a first-time user of setting up Phoenix Plus to select the Play All feature of the CD. This will go through in each chapter step by step on how to set up Phoenix for the very first time. Once this step is completed, if you need to go back and review a certain chapter, you'll be able to do that at the end of the Play All feature is completed. Going to Utilities, Options. On the General tab, we have a few options that should be set before you attempt to use Phoenix. Use gallons, not liters, as unit measure if you're in the US. If you're outside the US, obviously you would uncheck that. The same would hold true for use miles, not kilometers for distance traveled. If you are using PIN numbers for your single and driver type cards, you can have the program automatically generate you a PIN number as you create your single or your driver type card in the system itself. Fuel site controller uses account cards. If this option is set, basically you're telling Phoenix that you're managing account numbers in your fuel site controller. What this will do with this option is set, let me click apply here and OK, and bring open my account screen. It opens up another field called the sys account number. This is the field that is managed by your individual fuel site controller. If you're not using accounts in your fuel site controller, then you simply want to go back underneath Utilities and Options and uncheck the fuel site controller uses accounts. And this error is going to pop up letting you know if you had it set, you're going to clear out any system account numbers. It's okay to press OK at this point. Okay. And when I click apply and OK, when I go back to my account screen, that sys account number field is no longer there. Continuing on with options. On the general screen, we have KNR cards used in K2500/System2 controllers. Phoenix for Windows for the System 2 or FSC 3000 allows you to manage card records for standard K800 systems. So if you're using both K800 sites along with older K2500 System 2 controllers or the newer FSC 3000, then you want to check that box. Continuing on with options, we're going to go over to the polling tab. Underneath polling, we have 4 checkboxes in this screen. The first option is auto flag all new and modified cards for update. When this field is set, which it is by default, if I bring up my card screen for a second, when I'm adding a new card into the system, this update card checkbox no longer would have to be checked with this option being set. So automatically, with this field, this checkbox being checked here, when you're creating a new card record or modifying an existing card, you no longer would have to click on the update card box to save it. This checkbox does that for you. The auto update cards after polling checkbox, what this does when this is set, when you're polling your site, which is downloading the transactions from your fuel system, once the polling is completed, the system, meaning Phoenix, will check to see if there's any card updates that have not been sent down to the fuel site controller. So if there is, it'll send the card update to the site that you're pulling the transaction data from. On the second hand, if there are no card updates to be sent down, basically you will get a warning message that tells you there's no card update. Okay. The third option, which should be set, is called auto import data after polling site. What this does, in the background, when you're pulling the transactions from your fuel system, there's a file that's written first that has all the raw data, which is called K2500.trn, and the data sits in that file until Phoenix imports it. And what the import process does, it takes all the good fueling transactions that have legitimate quantities, and it checks for the card numbers that exist in the Phoenix side to post the totals to. Any transaction that were errors that occurred at the fuel island where there's no fuel being dispensed, those basically get discarded from the system. And we'll cover more of that when we go over the viewing the import summary file. So if this box is not checked, you could be polling your sites, but the transactions will never appear in Phoenix until you manually import the poll file. So this is always a good option to have set automatically. So when it's done polling, it imports it and you're done. The last item checkbox on the screen is called Log All PC to FSC Communications. This is used by the tech support team in case there's some kind of a communication issue between the Phoenix PC and the fuel systems that it's trying to poll. The log file gives the technician some evidence on how to troubleshoot the system. The last thing you need to be aware of are what's called poll files kept for history. By default, every time Phoenix polls and imports the K2500 file, it renames it from a K2500.trn to K2500.001. Every time you poll, a new TRN gets created and it gets renamed to a 001. The previous file that was at 001 gets renamed to 002, and so on and so on. By default, Phoenix never uses the imported data once it's been imported once into the program. If you want to keep track of these old raw polled files for your own well-being, you can set that number of files to be kept for history, more than 10 if you like, especially if you got multiple sites. Maybe you want to keep the last 10 polls from each site, then you could set that up for maybe a number of 40 files. And basically what happens once it hits the number of poll files to keep, it starts eliminating the oldest poll file, which will have the highest number on it. So in our example, if we had it set to 10, the 11th poll that would come in, the file that's named K2500.010 gets basically removed from the system. The .009 gets renamed to .010. Okay? Okay, continuing on with the options, we're going over to the Odometer tab. By default, these four features are not set in the program. We have single digit entries, same digit entered in multiple times, a sequential value entered in such as 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, or the calculated MPG does not meet the range defined for the card. If any of these options are set in the program, Phoenix will check the transaction data based on the criteria you've selected here to see if the odometer field on the transaction meets any of the criteria that's been selected here. And if it does meet the criteria, Phoenix will flag the transaction that's got a bad odometer. There's a odometer exceptions report that we'll go over later on that can be generated to show you which transactions got flagged and why they got flagged. This has nothing to do with what's taking on real time at the fuel island. This is during the poll, after the poll is done, and Phoenix goes to import the transactions. That's when these features are applied to the transactions. Okay, continuing on with options, Report Edit tab. You have two choices here. The first option is always print predefined reports without viewing. When this option is set, when you are generating reports from Phoenix, Phoenix will basically just send a report directly to the printer without viewing it first. If you do not like to use that feature, just leave this box unchecked. The second checkbox is Save Report Settings for the next printing. This may be handy to set. It'll basically save the criteria that you set up as far as the date range, basically queries for card numbers that you may be running the reports for, or based by accounts or sites, whatever the queries may be on this specific report. Those settings will be saved automatically for the next time you generate a report, so all you'd have to do is basically change your date range. Those are the only two settings on here. The other two features are not available to you. Okay, back on options, we're going to go over to File Location tab. The default database name is called p4w.mdb. That's an Access 97 database. And the default location is underneath your C local drive program files. This is a 64-bit Windows 7 machine that we have Phoenix installed on, so that's the x86 folder, Petroven, Phoenix, and data. Some companies may want to put the database on like a shared or network drive. Simply, that can be done by making a copy of the database, putting it on the drive that you want Phoenix to have access to, and then to point Phoenix to it, you click on your browse button, and then whatever network drive that you have available, you would point to that drive, search for that database, point to it, and then once you point to it, I'm just going to point you to an old database to show you how it needs to restart itself to it. When I click apply and OK, it tells you you've selected a different database to use as a default. In order to use this database, Phoenix must be restarted. Restart now. I'm going to answer yes. So Phoenix will basically shut down. Now it's switching to databases, and if I was on a network drive, I would switch it to that location on a network drive. It's back up again. You can see I've got a database that has ABC Oil Company as the name of the company here. And I go back to utilities and options, back to file locations. This is the database I selected. Okay, so I'm going to switch this back to the P4W by default. And that's right there. And I'll click open, click apply, and then click OK. And I'm going to answer yes to this question again. Okay, so that's how the database can be moved to a different drive location. If you want to run a simple backup utility within Phoenix, again, you would point Phoenix to the directory that you want the database to be pointed to. So I'll just click on a default location here off of this machine, put it off the root directory, which is C. I'll click OK. And then I have a backup frequency on how many days I want it to do the backup. I could do it every day by setting it to 1, and then I can have it prompt to overwrite, and I'll check that checkbox, and I'll click apply and OK. And basically what I've told Phoenix to do now is every day to do a backup. And the way this backup works, if you're in and out of the program several times a day, the backup is only going to take place automatically at the first time you exit the program. So if you've been in the program 2 or 3 times today and this backup was done the first time, it's only going to do a backup again until the next day when you exit the program. Also, with this being set, if you wanted to do a backup immediately without exiting the program, there's a quick way to run that by underneath File, and you go down to where it says Current Database and select Backup, and that'll automatically back it up to that location without you exiting the program. We'll cover that more in the next few. Continuing on with utilities and options, and we're going over the user strings. The user string is where you define your company name, which appears at the top of your title bar of Phoenix and also on every report that's generated through Phoenix. I will set this to OPW FMS. And if I click apply, you will see on the top of the Phoenix title bar, it has your company name there now. Also, the miscellaneous entry title. Some people use the miscellaneous entry title for an additional prompt entry at the fuel island terminal, such as a tax number, license number. If you are using that feature for some type of additional entry and you know what that label needs to be changed to, you can go ahead and change that label from miscellaneous entry to the title that you'd like. So I'm just going to change that to tax number. So anywhere in the program that has a miscellaneous entry field label, it will be changed and replaced by the tax number, also on your reports. Continuing on with your account window labels, you have account user 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to bring up the account screen to show you these labels where they're placed at. That's right there. You can see that the labels are on the account screen are listed right below here. Account user 1, 2, 3, and 4. Phoenix gives the availability to set up additional labels in the account screen itself. So if you needed like a primary contact field, we can change that field to say primary contact. And this is case sensitive, so however you're typing it here will appear the same in that feature field on the screen itself. And maybe you may want their phone number or their cell number. Once I click apply, you'll see in the background those two fields have changed now on the account screen. So I have the primary contact and the cell. So you just changed the label. I could put whoever the contact needs to be for the new account that I'm setting up or an existing one, and what their cell number may be. So the only place you'll see these additional fields are on the screen. There's no reporting that could be generated against them. It just gives you availability of attaching additional information for the account itself. Continuing on with strings continued, we have in the card screen, we also have user defined 1, card user defined 2. That's these two fields down here on the actual card screen itself. So if I needed like a phone number for the person that this card is going to, I could change that field to say phone number, and maybe an emergency contact number. And once I click apply, you can see now on the card screen in the background, it changed those two fields of phone number and emergency contact. Again, you would only see these two fields on the actual card screen itself. Continuing on with the user strings continued, we have additional labels that are used on the transaction window, which is the window behind that you see here. We have the card 1 title and card 2 title. By default, we default the card 1 title to be the driver. Some people refer to them as employees, so you could change the title to be an employee. And maybe the card 2 title, change that from a vehicle to a truck. And here again, you got the card 1 short name and card 2 short name. If you change this to be an employee for the card 1 title, it would just make sense to change the short name for card 1 to be employee name. And whatever you change the card 2 title to, if that's changed to truck, then you'd obviously want to change the card 2 short name to say truck name. Okay. Okay, the last option setting we need to go through is called modem. There are some sites that actually contact their fuel controllers through a dial-out modem instead of doing TCP/IP or serial connection. So if you're truly using a dial-out modem, we set up a default modem initialization string that Phoenix would send to your PC modem to initialize it to make the dial-out connection. Sometimes this needs to be modified by tech support depending on the make and model of the modem that's installed on your machine. Okay, now that we're going to add a new site into Phoenix so Phoenix can contact this site. There's a couple ways of getting to this Phoenix data access window, which I already had opened up. I'm going to close this. You have these icons up here. There's site information. If I click on that, that brings up the data access window with my site tab selected. If I close that there, I can go to view and go down to sites, and it brings up my same window. Site in, the first thing we want to do is click on new on the right hand side and give it a unique 3-digit site number. So we're going to start out with site 001. Your range is 001 through 998. As you can see up above, site 999 is reserved for off-site fueling. So these are for sites that don't have a field controller, but they want to be able to build transaction data manually into the program. System type, there's a drop-down selection here, and you select what type of controller is at this site. You have a K800 site, you have K2500/System2, and then in the newest one, which is the ART FSC 3000. And there's some other additional choices based on the version of software that you have in your controllers. We're going to set this one up for the ART FSC 3000 with proprietary cards only as my system type. I will give it a name. I will give it a short name, which is a 12-character field that is utilized by the field management system. Then we have your street address. City. State. Zip code. And then you can put in phone numbers, fax. If you have an email address, you can put that in there. We haven't defined a fuel provider yet, so this drop-down selection will be empty. We'll get to that in a few minutes. And then we have two checkboxes here. One's called Update Cards After Poll, and the other one is Clear Transactions After Poll. If my polling option was set to update cards after polling automatically, this would not be selectable. So underneath Utilities and Options here, just to show you, I have that unchecked. If I click that now and click Apply and then OK, you'll see that this is already set for me, so I cannot set that. It's always set due to that option screen. The second option is called Clear Transactions After Poll, and when this option is set, what Phoenix will do is when it's downloading the transactions, which they call a poll, the last transaction it gets in its raw poll file, it looks at the date, so it gets the month, day, year, and then there's a 3-digit sequence number, and it turns around and sends a clear command by that date and sequence number to the fuel controller, so it clears everything from that point and prior out of the fuel system, freeing up the system's memory. Okay, if this box is not checked, then no clearing takes place at the fuel controller whatsoever. Underneath the notes field, it's nothing more than a scratch pad. Some people, when they're using the PCI compliant version 3000 controller, sometimes they forget what the usernames are that they need to use to log into the system. So they could use this as a scratch pad. It gives them information when they pull into the site and they pull up the site screen what the username is. We'll call it OPW Tech maybe, and maybe the password is OPW123. It's just an example. Each site could have its own unique usernames and passwords, and those are used in the terminal window, which we'll discuss later. So once you get your information populated on the screen along with your system type, click on Save, and that adds that entry into Phoenix. Now you can see this up on the grid. Now that we've got the site configured, we need to set up the communications. If you click on your ComInfo button here, we need to define how is Phoenix on this PC going to communicate to the fuel system. If it's going to communicate over a phone modem, then we need to know what port the modem is tied to, and we need to know what baud rate the system is configured for. Okay, by default, Phoenix just defaults to 1200 baud, but if your modem and your fuel system is at, say, 9600 baud, then you need to match Phoenix to it. Stop bits are always 7. The data length is always 7. Parity is always even, and the inactivity timeout you can leave at the default of 10 minutes. Okay, and then you plug in what the phone number is in the site phone field here, and then there's 3 verification passwords that you need to supply based on what's configured in that particular controller. Okay, so if this was a phone, we would put in the phone number, and that would be the number that Phoenix would be dialing to the site. If it's just a serial connection, meaning it's a hardwired cable from the PC's COM port going directly to the site controller, which is within 6 feet of the controller of the PC, then you basically just need to set up what port you're using on your PC, and again the baud rate that the controller is set to, and these other parameters we leave at defaults. Again, you would have to set up your passwords to what the controller is set to. And then your third option is what we call TCP/IP. Okay, and we use the same field that's generally used for dialing out to a phone modem site to set up your IP. So it would be something like 10.0.1.569 is the IP of the controller, followed by a /, and then we need to know what the port socket number is that's identified for that Ethernet device. If it's a 3000 controller, the Ethernet port socket is set up to be 2101. If it's a System 2 or some other controller that's using an external device, we normally set up like the UDS Lantronix boxes to 10,001. But whatever that port setting is, you need to supply that after that field separator. Once you've got that set, you click Apply and OK, and that sets up your communications. Okay, so if you're using the Phoenix Premier third-party or OPW version, there's 3 additional settings you need to set up on the site screen. The first setting you need to tell Phoenix is what type of gauge it's going to connect to and how it's going to connect to it. Clicking on your gauge button, you'll have a drop down of various models of tank gauges. Okay, we have the OPW versions listed here, and if you have the third-party version of Phoenix Premier, you'll get the Veeder-Root TLS 350 and 350 compatible. I'm going to set this up to be connecting to a Site Sentinel-1, and I have 3 different connections that are available to connect to the tank monitor, just as we did, similar to what we did for the fuel site controller. A direct connect means where the PC is going to connect directly to the tank monitor within 50 feet using a serial connection. Dial-up means it's either going to use a dial-up modem, an analog modem with a phone number, or it's going to use a TCP/IP connection. And if it's going to be a dial-up, you have to supply what port, the baud rate of the controller, the data length of the controller, the parity of the controller, and stop bits. So these parameters have to match what your gauge is set up for if you're doing a dial-up, or even if you're doing a direct connect. If you're doing an FSC pass-through port connection, what this means is Phoenix is actually connecting to your fuel site controller, and the tank monitor has a serial connection from it to the fuel site controller. So if that is the case, then you have to make sure, I'm going to click Apply and OK here, you want to make sure that your tank monitor has the same COM information as far as the baud rate, stop bits, data length, and parity settings as the site controller, your fuel site controller, otherwise it will not pull it. So once you establish your connection to the gauge, the next thing that you'd want to do is define the tanks that you have on that gauge in Phoenix. Underneath your tank button, you click on Add to add a new tank, and automatically it's going to define the first tank for you, tank number 1, and what type of tank it is. If it's a standard tank, it's not a manifolded tank, or it's not a blended tank, you would select standard tank. You can see you have your other choices for standard primary, standard secondary, a manifold master, and then you have your slave, and you have your manifold master primary and manifold master primary secondary, and then your blended tanks. We're just going to show you how to set up the standard tanks here, and we need to match what product as far as the description, not letter for letter, but if tank 1 in your tank gauge says it's a diesel product, and you want to make sure that you assign diesel on the Phoenix side. So we'll select number 2 diesel, and we'll click save here, and that adds tank number 1 as a standard tank, number 2 diesel. And then let's say we've got unleaded at the site, we'll add that to the mix. We'll add that as tank 2, and just make sure that tank 2 on your tank monitor is also unleaded. And that's all there is in adding your tanks. Once you've got your tanks configured, the last thing you need to do is set up the pumps that pump these products. You click on pumps, and you add in the pump configuration to what you have in your fuel site controller. So pump 1, if that pumps out your diesel grade, and that's just a single grade dispenser, meaning it's just one pump, one hose, one product, you would define hose 1. The other hoses, they're typically used for a multi-grade dispenser. So there is grade mapping that's done basically on a multi-product dispenser, where sometimes they're mapped as hoses 1, 2, and 3, where you'd have your unleaded, your mid-grade, and maybe your blend product, which is your blend, and then your premium product. So we can map out up to an 8-grade dispenser, basically, is what it boils down to. Your standard mechanical style dispensers, they're used at retail sites. They typically are just single grade. So we're going to select it and map this out to be unleaded. Click save. And then I'm going to add in another pump, 4, and that'll be pump number 2, and map that to my unleaded and save that. Okay, and that's all there is for setting up the tank monitor functions for Phoenix to do reconciliation. Okay, clicking on view, we're going to go down to set up what's called support tables. Underneath support tables, we have what's called card status. Under card status, we have various codes that can be listed as to why the card is invalid, and one code for making that record being a valid record in the system. So the system 2 code, that is the code as usually used by the fuel management system. A card is valid, it's valid, that means it can be used in the fuel system. However, you may have various reasons as to why you want to invalidate the card from being used at your fuel system. If you're using the PIN entry, which is the security number, and you have the system forced to invalidate the card if it becomes invalid due to 3 bad pins, the fuel system will assign this code to it automatically. Invalid 3 bad pins. However, let's say you're managing the site and the customer isn't paying his fuel balance at all. You can go in and make the card or cards invalid, assign a code 3 to it, and the code 3 represents its invalid balance due. Invalid manager disapproved, locked out, bad credit. So there's up to 15 different codes that you can basically define as to why you want that card to be invalid. And where these codes get assigned to is when you're creating your cards or modifying your cards in the Phoenix screen. I'm just going to jump out of the screen for a second here and show you that on your card screen. This is the field right here where it says card status. Okay, so that's these codes that you're assigning to it. Continuing on with support tables, we have product codes that need to match up between your Phoenix program and your actual fuel site controller. We have product codes 01 through 16, which is unleaded through air on this list here. And if I click on products 17 through 32, these are basically at the faults. So these product codes out of the box match up the product code listing that's used by your fuel site controller, whether it be a System 2, K800, or an FSC 3000, which is the newest controller on the market. So if you're changing the description in your fuel site controller, let's say for instance code 1, maybe you're making this description to be E85 and you change the shortening to be E85. You want to make sure that you go into each fuel site controller that you're managing with Phoenix and change the description to match on all locations for the E85 product. The effects MPG calculation is whether or not products that are assigned to your pumps, if you're tracking odometers and you want the product to be calculated for an MPG, you would check that checkbox. Typically, like if you're using coolant, maybe water, air, oil, those you probably would not want to be figured in for an MPG calculation. Only your true fuels. Okay. Continuing on with support tables, we're going over to product restriction. In product restriction, not every site uses it, but if you are using product restriction to restrict what grades go into what vehicles, again, you have a System 2 or an FSC 3000 code that needs to be programmed in your site controller for the proper fuels that are going to be used by that code. So if code 01 is set up to be unleaded only in Phoenix, you have to make sure that code 01 in your fuel controllers are set up to only have unleaded fuel assigned to it. So when you're actually entering your cards into Phoenix and you go down to setting up what's called a product restriction code, this is the code number that it's pulling is from this table here. And I could show you that on the card screen. That would be this field right here, product restriction. So the drop down, which is grayed out because I'm not entering a card right now, is being referenced by the support table, product restriction code table code. So as you're creating them in your Phoenix program, you must make sure that these codes match up in your System 2s or 3000 controllers. Continuing on with support tables, quantity restriction. Here again, if you are using this feature in your fuel site controllers, you need to make sure that the System 2 code or the FSC 3000 code matches to what you've assigned to your codes in Phoenix. Code 1 through 15. So if you're making code 1 to be good for 20 gallons by default here, you want to make sure that code 1 in your fuel site controller is good for 20 gallons. Okay. Again, if you have a different value here, if this is set to 30, okay, and that's what I'm assigning to my card, when you go and use the card at your fuel system and code 1 is set to some other value other than 30, it's going to use the value that your site controller is set to. So these do need to match up between the two systems. Continuing on with support tables, if you're using the odometer reasonability feature in your fuel site controller, you need to make sure, as with the other two features, product restriction and quantity restriction, that the reasonability table matches up between your site controller and your Phoenix database. These code numbers are assigned to your cards, and these values represent the range on how many miles are going to be traveled between fuelings. So code 01, its minimum is 0, the maximum is 100, code 2 is 0 and 250, and so forth. If you make any changes to these minimum maximum values here, you need to make sure that in your fuel site controller you make those same changes. By default, this code table 0, 1 through 15 defaults to your fuel site controller. And here again, these codes get applied to when you're entering your cards into Phoenix. And that's underneath the reasonability field here. And that's only going to be your single and vehicle type records. Okay, now we're going to add in accounts into Phoenix. So to get to your account screen, I've had this already opened up. I will close this again and show you. You can get to the account screen by clicking on this icon here, which is account information. It'll bring up your Phoenix Data Access window with your account tab selected. Or you can go to View and go down to Accounts, and it brings up the same window. Accounts are used for billing purposes, or using departments. People will use accounts to create various departments and assign their card numbers, whether they be individuals or their trucks, to these account numbers. So we have what's called a Phoenix account ID. This is the account number field that Phoenix utilizes for billing purposes through its reporting. I mentioned the system account before. This is the account number that's being utilized by the fuel site controller itself. Okay, so when I click on New, the very first thing it's going to ask me for is the account ID. So this could be alphanumeric, so I will set it to be ABC 1, 2, 3, 4. And this will be an account ID that Phoenix will use for grouping all the cards in its program and for billing. The account sys account number field. This is a unique 4-digit account number that is going to be utilized by your fuel site controller. If you're using this feature, this field will be turned on. This can be anywhere from account number 0001 through 9999. That's the account number scheme that the fuel site controller is going to use. So I'm going to set this up to be account 0001, and that is linked over to the Phoenix account number ABC1234. The long name field is what Phoenix is going to show on its reports along with the account ID. So we'll call this ABC Oil Company. I can apply an address to it. It's not necessary, but you can. I can give it a city. And state. Zip code. And then if you have contact information, who the contact is for this account, you can put the account information in, the phone number, a fax, and email address. If you're utilizing the account user 1 through 4 fields for additional information, you would populate those fields as necessary, as well as the notes field. The notes field is here again is nothing more than a scratch pad. Once we have the system account number in, we have what's called a short name field. The short name field is the 9-character name field that's being utilized by the fuel management system. So we'll just call this ABC 123401. It doesn't have to be a total of 9 characters, but that is the total length that the system will take. And this is the name field that's going to be passed down with the sys account number down to your fuel site controller. So when you look at the account numbers in the fuel site controller, 0001, its name is ABC123401, and this account number is now going to be linked to the Phoenix account ID of ABC1234. Once I have this information set up, I'm going to save this, and that has my account added in. The next one is the reprice button. Once you start pulling transaction data into your Phoenix program, if you want, you can reprice those transactions by the account, and you can select what date range you want to reprice those transactions at, and select what grade you need to reprice and put in an actual price. And what that'll do is it'll reprice the transactions from the original price that the transactions were created at to the new price that you create within the program itself. If you simply make a mistake, you can go back and reprice them again and then regenerate your reports based on those new price settings. So if I was at $1 and I forgot to change my price and I had a bunch of transactions that were done for the month of November, I can go back, put in my month of November for my date range, and if this was the product that I forgot to change the price of my fuel system, I can go ahead and put in the price that it should have been done, and then I can click on reprice, and it'll reprice those transactions for this date range by this account by that price. The invalidate button will become valid only if the system account numbers are not being used by the fuel management system. So if I turn the system account number feature off, as an example here, it's letting me know I'm going to lose all the account numbers for the system accounts. I now am able to invalidate this particular account that's utilized by Phoenix. Okay, this basically just flags the record that it's an invalid account on the Phoenix side. It has nothing to do with the account ID or the system account number because I took that feature off. If I go back and set this up, okay, it retained the account ID or the system account number I assigned to it previously. Now you'll see that the invalidate is unavailable, and that'll be covered underneath the FSC account button now. Okay, since I am using system account numbers, the FSC account button becomes available to me. When I click on that, these are the parameters that go down for the account information of your fuel site controller. And here is where I can change the account status by the fuel site controller to be valid or invalid, and then I have these various options for my accounts. I also have the pump restriction code. Okay, I have my quantity restriction codes. And if you're using daily or monthly allocation on your fuel site controller and you want to put a limit on the system accounts, you got to make sure you put a value on those. You cannot leave them at 0. If you're not using daily or monthly allocation, then it doesn't make a difference what you set these values to. Okay, daily allocation is a monetary value that's assigned on a daily basis and resets to its full capacity at midnight. Monthly is a monthly a limit in dollars on how much they can purchase fuel. Expiration date is another feature that can be used in the fuel site controller, where they can manage expiration dates on the accounts as well as the cards themselves. Any changes that you do in this account data screen is treated just like a card. So you have an update an account window checkbox here, and you would click on that and click apply. And if you have additional prompts that are tied to this account, you would assign whatever prompt codes need to be assigned to that particular account from the message prompt screen. Okay, now that we've got our account set up, we're now ready to add in cards. So on the data access window, I have my card tab selected, and on your form you have to select which account you need to place the card under. Okay, so as you can see, the new button is not selectable at this point. So I click on my drop down selection, and I have my choice of maintenance cards, meaning the card is not going to be assigned to any account, or the account that I just set up, which is ABC1234. If I select this account here, then I need to select what type of card record that I'm going to build. I have 3 distinct choices. I have what's called a single card, I have a driver card, and a vehicle card. A single card, think of that as like your own private card that identifies you to get fuel. But it's not a credit card, it's just a fleet card that you're assigned. So you're assigned a card number, and when you swipe your card at the terminal, it identifies that this card number belongs to you, and it tracks how much fuel you purchase. So that's the principle of a single card system. The driver card and vehicle cards, they work together. You cannot have one without the other. So a driver card is typically assigned to a person, and then a vehicle card is assigned to a piece of equipment or vehicle. With that setup, you're actually tracking what driver is putting fuel into what vehicle. That's referred to as a two-card system. A card number that's issued out for a driver and one that's issued out for a vehicle. In our demonstration here, we're going to set up a single type card. So once I select single, and I've got my account selection, now I have a new button that I can select to add the card number into the system. So I'll click on new. Now that I've got my account and card type selected, those are locked in, I need to input the number for the actual card number that I'm going to create. If they're Petroven formatted magstripe cards, those are typically 16 digits, the first 4 digits being the unique network number. If they're using chip keys come encoded in various formats. There's a K800 format, there's a FSC 3000 System 2 format, and then you have the older K3000L format. So depending on what type of medium you're using, you need to create a number that identifies that piece of equipment with a number. So in our demonstration, I'm going to assume that we're using a magstripe card. It's a Petroven formatted card, and the network number is 0300, and it's card number 1. So to put in card number 1 in the system, I start out with my 4-digit network number, which is 0300, because I said it was 300. So that's the first 4 digits. I follow that up with 11 zeros. And the last digit, which is a 1. So this is a total of 16 digits for a MAG card. If I have a chip key and it's a System 2 format, it follows the same suit, except it'd be a 19-digit number instead of 16. Those are some of the examples. Now that I've got the number added in, I need to attach a name to that, and this is what we refer to as the long name field. So this name identifies card number 1, and the short name field is a 9-character field that's passed down to the fuel system with this number when it's passed down to your System 2 or FSC 3000 controller. It's limited up to 9 characters. As you can see, the PIN number field has populated automatically because the option is set up to automatically generate a PIN number. So this PIN number 0013 is assigned to this particular card number 1. If I want to use the expiration date, and that's actually turned on in your fuel system, I can check the expiration date, and that expiration date is programmable on the record on when you want this card number to be expired. If you are using odometer entries and you know what your current odometer value is, you can set that value up here, or you could set it to 0, or if you leave it set to being blank, basically that would set it up not to prompt for an odometer if you're using save odometer entries on your fuel site controller setup. Here again, these are features that are set up on your fuel site controller. So if you're using monthly allocation or daily allocation in your fuel site controller, make sure you populate a field of values in the monthly and daily allocations appropriately. Status on the right hand side is whether or not the card is valid or if it's invalid due to one of the reasons listed here. Okay. You have your product restriction. If it's supposed to be restricted to a certain grade. So as you can see, this is part of your support table set up in your previous screens that we're seeing here. If we want to limit how much they can get per transaction, set up a quantity restriction to it. Then if you're using odometer reasonability at the site, you assign your odometer reasonability range for that particular card. If you're using the user entry 1 and 2 for additional field descriptions like a point of contact or a cell phone number, you can put that information in here also. Continuing on, you have the verify prompts, similar to what you have in your account screen for the FSC. If you want additional prompts for these cards and your system is set up for additional prompts, you pick out what letters you want to assign to the card. So like message 3, C as in Charlie I should say, is trip number. Okay, I can assign that to this card and click apply here and OK. So when this message is assigned to this card and the card is swiped at the terminal, it'll pick up message letter C from the site controller, which is trip number. Card switches. If you are using a secondary language and this card needs to be set up to do the secondary language prompting at your fuel system level, you would check the checkbox to use a second language. Update card, here again, if you don't have the option set up to automatically flag and new modified cards for update, then you would click on the checkbox to update that card. If you wanted to use the odometer, or not odometer, but the miscellaneous entry for additional prompting, you would check that checkbox. And if your system isn't set up to save odometer entries, and you're not going to use reasonability at all, okay, so this field is basically null and void at that point in time, but you still want that card to prompt for an odometer, then you would basically check this checkbox that says allow odometer entry. Okay, so either you have this box set to prompt for an odometer, or in your fuel system setup you have reasonability turned on, and then you need to have a value set up in the odometer field. So those are how the card switches work. Once that's all set up, the last thing you would do is click on save, and that adds the record to the Phoenix program. Now that we've entered in the system account and the card record for that system account, we need to transfer that information from Phoenix to your fuel site controller. To do that, you click on Utilities, and off your Utilities menu selection there's a choice called Update Cards. And what this function does is it creates an update file in Phoenix for every site that you've got configured to send the update file with the information that you just created for accounts and cards, system accounts and cards from Phoenix. So when you click on Update Cards, you'll get a choice to select which site, and since we only have one site configured, I'm going to select site 001. Once you click on Update Card, then Phoenix will send this card update file, which is identified as CU001, down to your specific site, and that's how your card system gets populated with the FSC accounts and the cards from Phoenix. By the same token, if something happened to your site and you lost all your cards, okay, there is a choice that's called resend, and you could see that that is grayed out. The resend is site specific. So if you needed to resend all your cards and system accounts from Phoenix to a site controller that lost its card file for whatever reason, you need to go into your site window first and make sure you have your site populated in this lower half of the screen, and then you go to Utilities, and now you have the resend function that's available to you. When you click on that, that creates an update file very quickly of all the cards and all your system accounts that need to go down to that specific site. Then to resend that file that it created, created with all the cards and the accounts. You click the resend button on this screen, and then it will populate all your cards and system accounts back into that site controller. Okay, other features underneath utilities, there's called site backup. And site backup allows you to back up your configuration from your various site controllers. This will only work with System 2 site controllers only. So if you have an FSC 3000 controller, the site backup will not work with that particular controller. As you would think, the site restore is just the opposite of the site backup. The site backup contains all the FSC's configuration for pumps and the way the card file is set up in the system, the messaging and so forth. That's what's part of the site backup file. So if you have some older System 2 controllers that you want to back up that configuration in case the controller goes bad and needs to be replaced, you can do a site restore after the backup has been done and restore that information into your System 2 site controller. So these two features basically work hand in hand, and it's only available for your System 2 fuel site controllers, not the FSC 3000. Also underneath utilities, we have card backup and card restore. This allows you to back up site-specific card files from your various site controllers. And the card restore allows you then to restore that backup file into a site controller that lost its card file. The reason for having this feature is maybe you're not maintaining a global card file from Phoenix for all sites. If you got more than one site, maybe some sites have unique card files that are truly not being managed by Phoenix, but you want to use the utility to back up those cards. That allows you to do that. Allows you to back up the card file, and then if you have to switch out the controller for whatever reason, you can restore that unique card file back into that controller afterwards. Continuing on with utilities, we'll go down to transactions, and it has its own little submenu. Poll site. When you click on poll site, that allows you to poll transactions from a specific site from your drop-down list. And when you're polling the site, it writes to a file in the background called k2500.trn. That's where all the raw transactions are written to prior to Phoenix importing the poll file. Import poll file. What this will do is if your program is set up not to automatically import the poll file, well, polling the transactions only brings it into that K2500TRN file. You will not be able to report on that data until you import it into Phoenix. So the import poll file basically imports the K2500.trn file and strips out all the 0-gallon transactions, which are going to be referred to as discarded, and only brings in transactions into the program that the card numbers exist in the program and the transactions have valid quantities on them. Import incomplete. An incomplete transaction can occur if for some reason the cards were not inserted into the Phoenix program, but they existed on the fuel management system side. So as you're pulling those transactions, part of the import process is it looks for the card numbers that were used on the transaction to exist in the Phoenix program. If those cards do not exist on the Phoenix side, then it flags the transaction as being incomplete. So the incomplete transactions have fuel on them. They will not show up on any kind of a billing report. However, you need to fix that problem, and to fix the problem you would basically be adding those cards into the program. Once those cards are added into the program, you want to be able to import those incomplete transactions, and that's what this function allows you to do, is import the incomplete transactions so that you can actually bill those people out for the fuel that was used. The view import summary. Every time you poll the site, and the transactions are imported, whether they're imported manually through the import pull file function or if the program is set up to import it automatically. This import summary comes up telling you the date and the time, from where it came from a system 2 or K2500. It'll tell you how many valid records are actually imported into the Phoenix program. Out of those valid transactions, it'll also show you how many were flagged as incomplete, and incompleted transactions are transactions where the cards are missing from the Phoenix side. Discarded transactions or discarded records are transactions that have no fuel in them. So these would typically be your error type transactions that occur at the fuel system level side. Duplicates will only occur if you're not clearing out the transactions from the fuel site controller. So if you're constantly pulling the same amount of records along with new transactions, the ones that were previously pulled will get flagged as a duplicate record. They do not get put into Phoenix at all. It's just a notification letting you know that this transaction was previously pulled and imported. Then if you're pulling your tank monitor, your ATG, it'll show you how many inventories are pulled based on the number of tanks you have and the number of deliveries and any delivery duplicates. And this number here is the total number of records that were processed. From time to time on this import summary, you want to purge out this log file. Maybe once a month is a good time to do that. After it's done pulling and you view the import results, purge the log file out so that Phoenix can create a new log file. Okay, now that we've got the data that we want to manage and run some reports, we'll go through the reports section. If you click on reports, you can open up the reporter on its own, and basically it'll list out all the reports in alphabetical order. So they're not grouped in any order at all, they're just in your normal ABC strings. And you have what's called predefined reports, support table reports, and you can generate error log reports. Predefined reports, basically when you're going to run a report, you have to make sure that you're running a report based on how your site is actually set up. If you're using accounts, then you can run a report by the account. If you're using driver cards and single cards, then you can run a report by account for like single cards. We can click on view and we can do a selection as far as give it a date range, give it a relative date, and so forth. So this is just opening up the reporter on its own. I'm not going to actually run a report from this screen right now. If you go under reports and go down to accounts, now your reports are grouped by account or by cards or by sites, by transactions, by products. Then you have your support table listing, and then you have what's called customize. And customize basically allows you to remove the reports from these drop down menus that we just went through, and allows you to remove reports that you'll never run from appearing into the drop down menu. So let's say if you were never going to use a miscellaneous keyboard report because you're not using that feature in the system, you can remove that report from appearing from the menu. Okay, same thing would hold true as, let's say, if we're not using here's another one, miscellaneous. Okay, so those two reports, when I click apply, they won't show up in my menu drop down any longer. Okay, so that's what the customize does. Also underneath utilities, we have what's called Open Terminal. Open Terminal, some people refer to this as like DOS, is really opening up live communications to your fuel site controller. So if you needed to make a configuration change to the site controller because you had a pump go offline and you need to put the pump back online, well, the terminal window allows you to issue your command line commands to put your pumps back online. As an example, maybe changing the prices on the products. If you're observing daylight savings dates and you need to set your time correctly, Those are some of the functions that are utilized by opening up your terminal window and getting connected to your fuel site controller. The one thing you need to make note is when you're opening up the terminal window, none of the passwords are sent over for terminal operations. So if you're connecting remotely through a terminal window, you're going to have to put in your passwords for your terminal, remote terminal connection, and then whatever user login access that you use for that particular site. Okay, the last thing underneath utilities, when you have the tank gauge support activated in your software, is called tank gauge, and this is where you can pull your gauge. And what the pulling of the gauge does is it actually connects to your automatic tank gauge and pulls your inventory, current inventory from the gauge, and any delivery history from the gauge. Once that's pulled, obviously, you need to import that pull file, and that's what the second choice allows you to do. And importing the pull file basically allows you to import the current inventories that you just pulled and any delivery history that was pulled from your tank monitor system. Okay, up until now we've been adding new information into the program. Accounts, sites, cards, getting your product set up. Now it's assumed that you've been using the program and you've been pulling transactions from your fuel system and getting tank inventory data. So now we're on a different database that has real life transaction data for demonstration purposes now. To get to my transaction window, I'll close this currently and show you we can get to that window by clicking on this little gas pump with the money in front of it, and that brings up your transaction tab, or we can go over to view and go down to transactions. And this is the information that has been brought into Phoenix. We talked about polling earlier. When you poll, it writes transactions to a raw transaction file called k2500.trn, and then once it goes through the import process, it imports that data into the database. So what you're seeing here is transactions that were imported. Now, if you needed to create a manual transaction, say you were running your site in manual mode and you were writing down tickets for who was getting the fuel and how much they were pumping out, the first thing you need to do is get to this transaction window, and on the lower right hand side click on the new button. Okay, and then you need to select what site this transaction is going to be billed to. You have a 999 by default for off-site fueling, or you can select one of the sites that you actually have and we're running in manual mode. So I'm going to select site 001. Okay, and then I need to select the date and the time. So it's always going to default to the current date and time that you actually open the screen. So I'm going to say this transaction was actually done last month on the 30th of the current year, which is 2013. Give it a correct time, hours and minutes. And you noticed right here it created a transaction number that started with the letter M as in Mary followed by a 001. That means it's a manually created transaction. If you want to assign a legitimate 4-digit transaction number, you could, or you could leave it at the M. Once you get that information there, then you have an account ID, account name, and this is the employee and vehicle tag information. These will populate from the drop-down selections. So I'm going to select what card number was used to get the fuel. And because this card is assigned to this account ID 0001, it backfills the account ID and account name automatically. Okay, and because it's a single type card, the secondary card number field is grayed out because it's not a driver. It's only a single. Okay, the sequence number is not necessary to populate, but if you want to put a 3-digit sequence number indicating what transaction of the day it occurred, start out with 001. The hour meter in our case is really the miscellaneous entry field. If you're not using the miscellaneous entry field, that field can be left blank. Continuing on to the right hand side, you need to indicate what pump and hose. So we'll put in pump number 1, and it's a single grade dispenser followed by hose number 1. As a matter of fact, that 011 is how it should be put in. The pump numbers are always 2 digits followed by the 1 digit hose number. You need to identify which product it was. So I'm just going to select product number 1, what the price per gallon was, the quantity, and whether or not you have an odometer entry. You can key that in. It automatically populates the name for this card number, and there's going to be no vehicle name because this was a single type card. Termination code does not need to be filled in. And the last thing you need to do is click on Save. And that adds that transaction to the Phoenix database. If we need to edit an existing transaction that was pulled into Phoenix due to, let's say, the pulser was failing in the pump, so the pump or the dispenser was showing one value and the transaction was showing a different value. Once that transaction is downloaded into Phoenix and you know which one or ones need to be changed due to that error condition, you go to your transaction screen, find the transaction that you need to modify, click on it, and it'll populate the lower half of the screen. And let's say this one here where the quantity was not really 13.1 gallons but it was 25 gallons. You click on Edit at your top of your toolbar and click on Transactions. Now you'll notice at the very lower left hand side it says Currently Editing Transactions. If I go back here again and click Transactions, it tells me I'm Transaction Information Window Read Only. So it kind of tells you what mode you're in by looking at this left hand side of this pane. So I'll go back to Edit and select Transactions, and now I can edit. You can see what fields are editable on this transaction window. Okay, and I'm going to change the quantity from 13.1 to 25.0. And once I click on Save, the new total gets calculated out for the total monies that were dispensed. Okay, so that's the editing an existing transaction. Now, if I have got transactions that were flagged as having a bad odometer, I'm going to first of all click the edit again, uncheck the transaction, so now that I'm back into transaction information window read only. Now this is a multi-purpose view window, meaning this transaction window is used for looking at information, editing, and also looking at what we call the bad odometer transactions or incomplete. The first one we're going to cover right now is called the bad odometer transaction. Okay, and how I can tell I've got bad odometer transactions is this icon on the upper left hand side will be lit up when I'm on my transaction screen. So if I click on my card tab, you notice that these icons are grayed out. When I'm on my transaction tab, if I have a bad odometer transaction when I'm in this view, this odometer, this icon will be lit up. When I click on that, it changes the view and it shows you that I'm currently editing bad odometer transactions only. Okay, and you notice that the records have dropped down to 36. Whereas if I click on this again, I'm back in my transaction information window read only. There's a total of 692 transactions in here. Okay, so I'm editing my bad odometers, and the first one off the list is what's populated down below. And the reason why this got flagged as having a bad odometer is because I keyed in a sequential value 1 0, and this may be correct. This may be a good entry, but because the program is set up to flag that it's got a bad entry, it got flagged. And if I want to go ahead and accept that anyway, I can go ahead and rekey that odometer that it's a good odometer and click on Save, and this is going to be unflagged, and it gets unflagged as soon as I change that. Here's another one down below here. There's a sequentially entered in value. Maybe this one really should have been like 1 2 or 1 1. And by changing the odometer, clicking save, the flag gets unflagged for having it as a bad odometer. Okay, so you can see that these were all getting flagged because they were sequentially entered in values. Okay, continuing on, we have incomplete transactions to go over. Okay, again, we mentioned that this transaction view screen is multi-purpose. I'm currently in the editing incomplete transaction view, as indicated here in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. If I uncheck this stop sign, it tells me I'm transaction information window read-only pane, 692 records. So this icon is lit up indicating I got incomplete records. When I click on it, it changes my view, shows you I'm currently editing incomplete transactions. And incomplete transactions are typically the cards are not on the Phoenix side, but they were in the fuel system, and when the transactions got pulled across, Phoenix looked for the card to exist on the Phoenix side. It didn't find it, so it flags it as incomplete. This first transaction record we're looking at here on the screen, there's the reason box right there. It says unknown card 2, and it shows you the card number that's missing from Phoenix at the time that the poll was done. So to fix that condition, we can cheat here a little bit by highlighting that card, doing the copy, go to my card screen, and I don't know what account it needs to go into, so I'm just going to assign it under maintenance for the demo purposes. And since that is card 2, that's a vehicle card, so I'm going to select vehicle. I'm going to click on new, and I'm going to paste that card number in, and I'm going to assign it the same name as the card number, short name, the first 9 characters of it, and I'm just going to assume that the rest of the information is correct. In all reality, you would go through and make sure that you have all your choices set up for that card. And once you save it and add it to the card, it says it's already in use. That means when this card, when this transaction was pulled, this card number wasn't in at the time. Okay, so let's say if this wasn't there, that's how I do the add it in. But since it is there, to move it over from incomplete, we go to utilities, go to transactions, and then you select import incomplete, and it moves that one record across. Okay, it only shows me I only have 6 incomplete, and you would continue going through that process, adding the missing cards. So I can go right back into my transaction screen, and there's my next record that's missing. It's missing this card number here. I would add that one into the database. Okay. The other types that you can run into that are not viewable, it's only noted when you look at the import summary. And those are discarded records and duplicates. Discarded records, as I mentioned before, are transactions that have no fuel on them. So when Phoenix is importing the transaction data from the poll file, if it's got 0 gallons on the transaction, it discards it from going into the database. It keeps the database from having 0 gallon sales. And duplicates, as I mentioned before, are transactions that were polled previously, and the site may be set up not to clear after polling is completed, so it keeps repolling the same records over and over again. They just get flagged that they're already been polled and imported into Phoenix, so you don't end up having duplicate transactions in your database at all. If you're wanting to view your network transactions, like if you're running a bank card interface or a fleet network such as CFN, Comdata, Fleet One, just to name a few, those transactions also get pulled and downloaded into Phoenix along with your proprietary card transactions, which is all we've been dealing with so far. To view your network transactions, and you're in your transaction window, click on View at the very top left hand side and select Network Transactions, or press F9. Now you're viewing your network transaction information window read only, and these will be all your fleet type transactions that you can view on the screen. And when you're done viewing them, you click on the view a selection again and uncheck the F9, and you're back into your transaction information window read only. Also on this transaction view screen, you have an export button. Depending on what view you are on, allows you to export the data from that screen directly what's in there. So we're in the transaction information window read only, and it shows me I have 693 transactions. If I click on the export data button, what that'll do is it'll bring up a window as far as where I want to save the transaction data for the export, which by default is going to always default to your data folder of your installed software. You would give it a file name, and then you have these file choices to select from. Okay, and you notice there's no date range or anything. Basically whatever's in that view is what you can export. Okay, so if I just click ASCII CSV and click save, it's going to create an export file in that directory and of all the transactions. So that's 693 of them. The better utility to use for exporting data is underneath the file, and there's an export selection here, which is a true wizard. When you click on that, now you have a choice where you can export all just like you did from the previous screen, or you can select what date range of data that you want to export. Through, and then you have your ending date there. And then you have a choice that says fleet options. When exporting to fleet maintenance programs, records can be flagged as exported to fleet. Doing so ensures subsequent exports will not send the same record twice, should records be flagged as exported to fleet. So if you want to set that option up, you would answer yes, and then when you go to next, it gives you an optional transaction type screen. If you have transactions that you are manually creating into the program and you want those to go into the export, you click on the manually entered transactions. If you have bank card transactions or fleet network transactions like CFN, Comdata, or Fleet One, and you want those to show up in the export, you click on the network transaction. And if for some reason you've exported this out and lost the file, or the file got corrupt, and you need to go ahead and re-export the transactions that were flagged from a previous export, you can click on the third checkbox and it'll allow you to re-export that exported previous data again. And then you have a Save As button where you want to save the data. Again, it's going to default to the Program Files OPW Phoenix Data folder. You select, again, your list of files and give it a name, and then click on Save. And it creates the export file there. Okay. So each time you download transactions into your Phoenix program and it goes through the import process, your database is going to grow larger and larger. And if you don't need to keep multiple years of transaction data in Phoenix, you can make your database a lot smaller by using what's called an archive function. The archive basically will move transactions from the current database into a secondary database, which is called arc of P4W. So it doesn't delete the transactions. However, once the transactions are archived, you no longer can perform any exports if you needed to re-export that data out for a third-party application. Okay, you will be able to report on that data once you move it to an export file. They just will not be able to see those in this view. To run the archive, and it's not reversible, so make note that when you go to run the archive, this is truly what you want to do with that data. If you do run into an issue where you archived incorrectly, uh, please feel free to contact tech support on how to handle that matter correctly. Archiving, you click on Archive Transactions, and you get an Archive Transaction window pane. It shows you the database location, the last archive, and you can see here this was never archived previously. However, I want to only archive, maybe keep the last 2 or 3 years worth of data in the system. I'm just going to archive up through July of 2009. So I'll go up to the 31st. Okay. And once I archive this, you can see it moved out practically half the database from this current view. It dropped down to 348. And now if I go back to my archive selection here, it shows you what my last archive date was up to. So that means everything on 7/31/09 and prior is no longer in the current database, so I can no longer export that data, but anything after that date is still in the current database for reporting and exporting. Okay, so now I'm actually going to go through and run a report by what's called a calendar date. I have accounts in my system, and you can see that I have various cards grouped to my various accounts. So I can actually run reports from an account grouping standpoint. When I go to reports, I can go in accounts, and let's say I want to run an activity DET. DET stands for detail by account for card 1. Card 1 is typically my driver type cards. So if I select that, it's giving me a warning because I've got some transactions that are flagged as either incomplete or they got bad odometers. So that's the reason why this warning message comes up, just letting you know that your MPG calculation is going to be out of range, and we know that, so we'll answer yes to that to continue on. And now I have my query that I could set up. So if I want to do it for all accounts, I would leave it at 0 asterisk for the start number, account number, and Z asterisk for the ending. Or if I want a specific account, I can select it from my drop-down list. Okay, so I'm going to leave that open for right now. And standard date is allowing you to use a calendar. So if I click on my select date from selection here, I get my current calendar date. And I really don't have any transaction data for 2013 in here, so I'm going to have to go back to like 2009 for this database. And let's say I want to go back to, this is about as far back as I can go. Let's go August 1st, 2009 through today's date. Okay. If I wanted to use if I needed to run reports from the archive file, I would check this box that says use archive data. Okay. So we're going to go and generate a report. And basically this is what the report viewer will look like. I'll try to expand this out. I can't really expand it out too big. But there's the account number. Okay, there's the site. And then here's your basically your driver card that was used, and it shows you the fuel transactions that were generated by that card, and gives you the odometer readings, and it also gives you the miscellaneous keyboard entry, which was the hour meter reading in our case here, and gives you the price for each transaction as they occurred in the quantity, the average calculated price, the total quantity. Okay. And there's the next card number that was underneath that account. You got 16 pages worth of records here. Okay, so and it'll totalize each account, how many transactions there were in there at the very end. If you go to the end of the page, it'll give you a total summary here. So each account gets totalized at the very end. Okay, so that's one of your reports that you can run. It's by the calendar date. If I went back into that report again, instead of using the calendar date, I can go into what's called relative date. A relative date, these are your selections. And obviously I don't have any data for 2013 to go to previous year or anything for current year, 2012 and 2013 respectively. So I couldn't select any of these choices. But that's the difference between selecting standard date or relative date. And this is running the report by the account. You have the same type of reports when you go down to cards. Now they're not going to be grouped by your individual accounts. They're just sorted by the actual card number themselves. So here again, if I wanted to create all my cards I want to run a report against, I could leave the start number at 0 asterisk and 9 asterisk for the ending card number, and then basically select my appropriate date range that I have the data to run against. And you'll see that this report's grouped a little bit differently because it's not sorted by the account number now. They're all grouped by the individual card numbers, listing out every transaction the driver cards did. Shows you the vehicles that it fueled. Like this is driver card, they call it the employee 135, the last 3 digits, and there is the vehicle that it fueled 125. And there's this vehicle driver number here. Okay. Continuing on with reports, we have our various groups, accounts, and here's our reports that you can run by the accounts. So you're always being sorted by the account number that the cards fall under. Card reports, they're not grouped other than they're sorted by the numbers themselves. So you have card 1 will always reference your driver cards. Card 2 reports always reference your vehicle cards. And then you have your single type reports. As we mentioned earlier, there are 3 different card types. Card 1, Card 2, which are driver, vehicle, and then your single type cards. Underneath sites, you'll see the similar reports that you've seen underneath accounts and cards, but now you're grouped by the actual site. So if you got more than one site, you could break down the reports for each individual site for your accounts and your individual cards. Transactions, you have a bunch of transaction reports to go by. Your 2 incomplete ones are typically only ran when you have incomplete transactions. But then you have your network sorted by user entry 1 through 9, network trans by date. So these are all like your bank and fleet card type reports. And then if you're using the additional multi-user entry prompts for your proprietary cards, you can sort by the user entry prompts 1 through 9. Then underneath products, these are the 2 reports you can run by the site for the year or sites by the date. And then the support tables are basically your program setups for card defaults, chip key codes, product restriction codes, products themselves, prompts, quantity restriction codes, and reasonability. And we went through customize before. There are a bunch of canned reports, and you start finding out which reports you're never going to run. I would just suggest removing them from the list, and that basically will make your drop-down selection a lot cleaner. So if you're never going to run the detailed invoice reports at all underneath the account selection, you can go over to support tables and customize and go down and find that report or reports. And once I click apply, those will remove those two reports from the account drop-down listing. So that's how that works. If you make a mistake, you can go right back to Customize and add the reports back in. And clicking Apply. So if you're running only single cards at the site, basically, you would remove basically all your card 1 and card 2 reports from the system because you're not using driver and vehicle. So the reports are all based on how your system's actually configured. If you wanted to automate your process for polling and possibly generating reports without having Phoenix be running all the time on your machine, you can basically close Phoenix down, and there's another application within Phoenix. It's called the Auto Poll Scheduler. Sometimes you'll hear it called PAPS. To start the Auto Poll Scheduler, you would have to go and click on your Windows Start button and go to All Programs. Underneath All Programs, look for a folder that's called Petroven, and underneath the Petroven folder there'll be another subfolder called Phoenix, and then you will see an icon called the Auto Poll Scheduler. When you click on that icon, that will open up the Auto Poll Scheduler application. Okay, the first thing you want to make sure is this can be launched at your Windows startup. So if you're shutting down your machine at night and you start it up in the morning, you want the scheduler to start up automatically without you having to manually set the scheduler up. Click on File and go to Launch Scheduler at Windows Start and click there, and that will basically put a checkbox there to launch the scheduler at Windows Start. Okay. The second thing you want to make sure is whatever database your Phoenix program is using and the location, you want to make sure that your scheduler is set up to point to the same location. Okay, so the program that I was using before, Phoenix, was using the account p4w.mdb file, so I want to make sure that that's the file that the scheduler is set to. Okay, now to add an event, you click on Edit and you click on Add Event. Give the event a name. So if you're polling a site and you're polling it every day or once a week or once a month, give the event that type of a name. So we're just going to call this a daily poll. And then you have what type of function this is. Okay, you have poll site and update cards only, backup system, backup cards, print report, export transactions. Okay, we're going to select poll site and update cards as the event. I can give it how many attempts to retry. If there's a problem trying to connect to your fuel system, it'll attempt by default 3 times. I'm going to enable that event. Okay, and then underneath your site selection, you select if you want all the sites to be included into this event, you click on Select All. Or if you want to set up an individual event for each site, then you select each individual event by itself, each site. Okay, and then you have what's called poll options. Okay, if you're doing multiple sites, okay, this is where this comes into play. Import poll data on a failed event. So let's say the event is set up to poll all your sites. Okay, and maybe out of the 6 sites that I've got selected here, it can't connect to site 3 for whatever reason. Maybe the phone line's out or the phone modems has gone bad. But I was able to poll the other 5 sites. Well, I've got some transaction data that is sitting in limbo depending on what this setting is set to. So if I have this box set to import poll data on a failed event, basically what we're telling the software to go ahead and import even if we have a problem with polling one of the sites. At least you'll have the transaction data from the other 5 sites showing up in Phoenix. The other option that we have set for is disable card updates. Okay, so if I want to disable the card update, I can. So that means even though this utility here is pull site and update cards. It's not going to update the cards when this box is checked. Okay. And then my third option would allow me to pull the tank gauge after done with the site controller. I would set that flag if I have the tank gauge option available to me. So basically what you would do is once it's done pulling your fuel system, if this box is set, it'll basically go ahead and pull the tank monitor, getting your current inventory and deliveries. Okay. Once you get these features set up, you need to go over to frequency, and you have a choice of executing it only one time or executing at regular intervals. So you can have it set up to run every day, every 3 days, 2 days, 4 days, 7 days. We could do it every week, once a week, every month. So those are your selections for the frequency. And typically, if you've got a site that has a tank monitor, you're going to do this every day, so you can do your reconciliation between Phoenix, your card system, and the tank monitor itself. And since you're setting this up for the first time, it's going to ask you for a starting date. So you set up a starting date at what time. And typically, you want to make sure that if you're going to have the scheduler running in the morning or late at an evening, there has to be a user logged in on that machine for the scheduler to fire off. So if you're going to have no user logged in on the machine, don't have an event scheduled after your normal business hours. And once you have the, so I'm going to set this up for 8 a.m. The last thing to do is click Add. And what that'll do is it'll add the event. You see that it's enabled. There's your event name. It's called Daily Poll. It shows you what the next due date is. And in our case, it's Wednesday at 12:11. Last result, because it hasn't run yet, it's unknown. And then the type of event that it is, pull site and update cards, and the frequency is 1 weeks. Okay. And let's say I want to add in another event that after the polling is done, I want to be able to run some type of a report. And here again, we're going to go to Edit, Add New Event, and we'll call this one Reports. And the type, we'll change that to be Print Report. Okay, and now you get a listing of all your predefined reports. Oops. Okay, so you'd find which report you're going to be running on a constantly monthly basis, and you have to set up the parameters. And this is the tricky part. You want to make sure that you include the entire account number range or card range depending on which report you select. And then you're not going to use a standard date for this feature. You're going to use relative date, and you're always going to run the report for yesterday. So basically every time you poll, because normally this will be set up on a daily basis, you're going to want yesterday's report data to be shown up on your report, and you'll see that the send to printer report is set. Click OK, and then you have underneath the frequency, you can set it up to run at regular intervals or link it to another event. So I want to link this to my daily poll. So if I set that option up, it'll only run the report based on the daily poll when the daily poll is completed and is successful. And that's how you set up the scheduler to do a daily poll or weekly poll and link a report event to that poll.